Good afternoon, and welcome to the very first episode of the Dev Show. My name is Sherry List.
And my name is Rasmus Jacquet, and we are your host for the Dev Show. So, talking about the Dev Show, Sherry, what is this awesome Dev Show really all about? Can you explain it for me?
Yes, definitely. So, the Dev Show is your very new favorite weekly show. It's going to mostly be hosted by Rasmus and I. And on each episode, we are bringing a guest that is going to have a deep dive in one specific topic, and you all are going to have chance to ask your question. And how? You're watching us either on YouTube or on Twitch. So whenever that you have any question, you can just type your question in the comment, and then we are going to ask the question from our guest, and it's going to explain it for you. And Rasmus, is it sunny out there?
I think there just came some clouds in over Denmark, but it has been sunny today. So,
Is
yeah,
it summer? Is it Danish summer?
it is. It's summer in Denmark. So, classical summer in Denmark with clouds and also some rain, but sunny
Yeah.
today.
Okay, great. Because one thing is that on each of the dev show, you are going to have the chance to get an Azure Heroes. And since Osmus confirmed that is going to be summer, so you all are going to get one of these cute summer learner badge. And
Ooh.
how I'm going to explain you later after the Q&A how you can claim one of these cute Azure badges. Okay, so speaking of the guest and topic, what do we have on the agenda for today, Rasmus?
Yeah, we have a very exciting topic about how to deploy to the cloud with Azure Static Web Apps. And yeah, the speaker today, it's gonna be exciting as well. So I'm just gonna introduce him. He's the Swedish Viking, but he's based in London right now. He's working as a senior cloud advocate within Microsoft. He's been in the IT industry for more than 15 years, working as developer and architect, and working on various tech stacks like .NET, Java, and Python. He's been speaking on more than 70 conferences, and also a published author and avid blogger. So really exciting. But that's more of his bio. I know that you know the speaker a little bit closer. So do you have anything more to say about the speaker today, Sharon?
Yes, you mentioned that he is a Swedish Viking. So he
Yes.
did a lot for the community. But one of the things that he did, he was one of the co-founder of NG Vikings. For those of you out there that you don't know about NG Vikings, is the main Angular conference in the Nordics, and is going to change each year from one country to another country. And this year it even went to the cloud. And then our speaker is one of the co-founder of that, and we call him the creative Viking because he is the one that who came up with the idea of NG Vikings. And a Viking history is apart from what Rasmus mentioned, is one of the topic you can also ask question from him. He knows a lot about the Viking history, and if you check out his Twitter, apart from all of the technical topics, he often mention about baking because he's a pretty good baking, especially he bake a lot of cakes and breads actually. So, what is his name, Cosmos?
So yeah, so just before I release his name into most of you might already know it because you have seen the slide. But what if I have a question during the presentation? Am I able to post a question somewhere that I can get answered by the speaker?
Yes. On the For those of you that you recently joined, you can ask all of your questions in the chat box, either on Twitch or on YouTube. As soon as that you write it, we are going to ask it from the question. And during the talk, we might actually post some additional links, or even we might also answer some of your questions there. So use the chat box there.
That sounds really good. So now I don't want to drag it out anymore. Let's welcome Kristen Oring. to talk about today's topic on how to deploy to cloud in minute with Azure Static Web Apps. Take it away, Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm super stoked to be here. Thank you, Sherry, and thank you, Rasmus, for that intro. Right, shall we get going? Let me just have a look at some PowerPoint. We love PowerPoints, right? All right then. As Rasmus was mentioning, I will be talking about a service called Static Web Apps. This is a very new service from Azure that will make your life, if you have a certain type of application, very easy when it comes to deploying. If you have some comments or questions, post those during the talk or reach out to me afterwards at Chris_Noring on Twitter. Right, so there are two types of applications that are usually on one's mind when you think about, I want to deploy something. You might be used to the ones on the left here, on the right, the web app. Most of you know what a web application is. It has something that has a front end and something that has a back end, but it's also dynamic. So what do I mean by dynamic? What I'm saying is when you go to a certain URL, what it does is it tries to construct the end result for you. And the end result is something HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. But how does it get there? Well, it gets there because it talks to a backend and say, hey, I want this data, and you merge this together with my markup, and you come up with the end result that is a page. Now, that's the only part of your application that's dynamic like this. You most likely have like a static pages as well, if your application is large enough. So the web app is really two different models here, dynamic pages and static pages. We also have a static app, and the static app doesn't really have dynamic pages at all. And as such, it's only HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And by that, it's a lot faster to show to you. It doesn't sound like much, right? I mean, if you have a static app that's only that, it doesn't have any backend, how useful can it be? It just sounds like if you, I don't know, product pages or something like that. But let's move on before we talk about the pros and cons of each approach. Here, to produce a web application today, you tend to look at it as having different stacks, the front-end stack and the back-end stack, or layers rather. So when it comes to producing the front-end part of the web app, you might go towards SPA frameworks like React or Angular, Vue, or even Svelte. I don't know if you've heard of Svelte this far, but we also have the static app. And the static app, we can actually produce that using static site generators like VuePress that has Vue.js in the bottom, or Gatsby that actually has React underneath, or using the new Scully that has Angular underneath. Let's move on. I want to talk about a concept called Jamstack. This is the reason why we talk about static apps in the first place. And let's try to investigate what this concept is. You might not have heard of it. A Jamstack is more an idea over a specific tech stack. So what it essentially means is I want to produce static pages. Why? Because they have better performance, they load faster, and as we all know nowadays, if you go to a search engine, it might actually punish you if your page takes too long to load. So if you have a static page, that's going to be super fast compared to a dynamic page. You also have a higher security because you don't have a backend when you have a static page. I mean, it's already there, right? Everything the user might possibly know of is already on the page. It's a lower cost of scaling because it's using something called CDN, a cloud delivery network of computers that actually has a copy of your static app in many, many places. So when there's an onslaught of users, maybe in the millions or in the thousands, all of them can go to specific CDNs and it can take all that load off. And the developer experience is quite heightened using this approach as well. It may sound like this is kind of a niche thing. You might not see this. Most of you might still gravitate towards using a web app, but there are definitely areas where static apps shine. And also, the Jamstack, as I said, is only an idea. You don't have to limit it to only be a static app. You can actually have APIs that it talks to. So for example, if there are third-party APIs or maybe there's a serverless API, you can definitely make that static app grow a little bit. If you want to know more about the concept of Jamstack, I suggest you follow this link here at the bottom, jamstack.org, to learn more about this idea. Now, let's have a more in-depth look technically what actually goes on. If you see here at the left, we see that we have a front end and a back end and a database. And usually what happens when a user navigates into a certain URL is that you want some kind of front end constructed for that user. So you make a call towards the back end makes a call towards the database, and given the response from the database, it ends up serving some kind of front end to the user. Looking at the Jamstack, let's start looking at the bottom here at the pre-rendering process. So here at the bottom, if we look at the bottom left, we see that we might have a database, we might have JSON, and we might have YAML or some other kind of static content. We also have markup. And then we try to pair all that data with the markup, and we end up with static pages, which is just HTML and CSS. Right, so after we have produced all of these static pages beforehand in this pre-rendering phase, then we can actually put them in a CDN. So here you can see the same static app being made into several different copies on that CDN to meet the demands of hundreds, thousands, or even millions of users. And I've kind of left the APIs outside of the CDN just to say, hey, you can actually augment and make these static apps better by having them talk to APIs if you want. But the whole thing I want to tell you here is that there are two different ways, right? The one on the left is probably the one you know. The one on the right, if you haven't heard of the Jamstack, this is what it does. It pre-renders everything beforehand. It doesn't happen just in time like it does with a traditional model. Right. So let's assume that we have a Jamstack. We have a static app, right? We may or may not have some kind of API that might be serverless. And how do we deploy this? Well, it kind of depends on what service you are using, but most cloud providers today, like Azure or Netlify or something like that, they might actually allow you to deploy the static app and the API at the same time. You have some things that you might need to consider as well. And that's the fact that when you are dealing with a static site generator or some kind of SPA application, you need to consider fallback routes. And this is because SPA applications, they have this router concept that when you actually refresh a URL, you might break it, because if you don't lead them back to the starter page, the index HTML, it might not know where to go because of the way the routes look. I will show you this later in demo. There are also things like authentication. I mean, all apps need that, right? You need the ability to log in, and you need to differ between different roles, like the admin or the normal user, or you might even have a more fine-grained experience than that. And then you need to think about, do I actually need to pre-build this? What do I need to do? Do I need to have JavaScript bundles? And there might be some concerns here and different vendors and different providers do this part differently of how do I need to prepare. Right. I said today this would be about Azure Static Web App Service. Here's a mile-high view of everything that it offers. So we can see that, yes, we can do web hosting with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We have an integrated API, so you can add a backend part to this if you will, but it's more of a API, right? And you use the Azure functions to do so. And there's also first-party GitHub integration, which means that we have GitHub actions being created when you trigger builds and you do the actual deployment. And it's globally distributed. So it has a CDN that's already on, and that works well. Added to that, we have free SSL certificates, and we also help you to set up your custom domain. And don't need to worry about CORS because of the way that things are deployed. And one thing I'm extra excited about is the fact that authentication is a thing that it comes with from the get-go. So you have that integration towards Azure Active Directory, towards Facebook, Google, GitHub, and Twitter, and you can just choose which provider that you want. And it's also possible to customize all the different routes in your application. So certain routes are protected by behind logged in users, or maybe that you need to be logged in and you need to be an admin. And yeah, so we have all these routing rules. Okay, then, a lot of talk, a lot of slides. I know most of you are probably developers. So you're like, okay, show me how this actually works. What do I need to do? So let's have a look at the demo. So here we're starting off in the portal. So when you want to deploy this, you go into the portal, you look for static web apps. This is in preview. So this is not actually a full working version yet, or it doesn't have that full support status, but it's globally available and it works quite well. But remember, it's a preview. So here you select your subscription, you select a resource group, and what else do you do? So once you've selected a resource group, I have quite a few, as you can see. Right, let's try to enter something here, something good. Chris Jam, that's my new jam. Yeah, so the next step here is to enter some static web app details, and that's the name of the app. And then you need to specify where you deploy this. So that would be the region. And as you can see, the SKU is free because it is free, right? And this integrates with your GitHub. So what you need to do at this point is to select a repo in which your application lives. So I'm selecting an organization, and I'm also going to be selecting a repository at this point. Okay, so we have the org from GitHub, we have the repository, and I can select a branch. I can either go with a master branch or some kind of other branch that I have on my repo. So that's good. So the next thing here is build. And whoops, a bit too fast. Sorry about that. Let's go have that run again. See if I can skip that a little bit. Right. You've done all these pieces, right? Not going to touch that again, I promise. I think we were somewhere here. Yeah, okay. So the app location is really where your front-end app lives. The API location is where your API lives. If it exists, it just ignores this if you don't have an API on your repo. And the artifact is actually where your dist folder exists after you've built the app. Don't worry about building it beforehand. It will be done for you. But it's good because different SPA frameworks actually have a different name for this dist directory. I think in most cases it's called build. In some other cases it's called dist, and so on. So here we're just reviewing everything here. And we have a resource group, we have a region, repository, and now we go on to create this. All right. And here we have trying to deploy our application. You know how it is with the cloud. It takes a few seconds, sometimes a couple of minutes. But I said deployment in minutes, not in seconds. Now we have a deployment success here on the top right. So we can go back into here. And we have a URL. This is actually where our application is being deployed. And we have a workflow file. This is being generated for us, and it's being added to our application. A quick look at the workflow file. As we can see, it contains some conditions on when should this be rebuilt, but it also contains some parts of the selections we did for where the front-end app is, where the API is, and so on. So here we can follow it. We are in GitHub. We see that different steps are executing to build our application. It will start by pulling down different Docker containers, and once it's done with that, it will do some other bits, which includes building your application and then eventually pushing it to a place so you can reach it through that URL that we showed earlier. I believe this is a few minutes wait, so I can see if I can jump this a bit. Right, so now we can see like roughly a minute and a half later that it has built and it has deployed everything, and we're ready to actually go and see what this looks like. So now we go to the actual URL once all of these steps have completed. We go to our application, we see that it contains, well, it's an inventory app, right? So we have two different routes, home and products. And right, so that's, I think, all we're going to show in this demo. Yep, it was. So let's move on, because there are some other demos that I want to show you. But that's how a simple deployment can look like towards Azure. You start off with a GitHub repo. You select the org, the exact repo, the exact branch. You do a few clicks and selections, and boom, a couple of minutes later, it's up there on Azure, and it's running, and it's working fine. I want to highlight again the parts in your portal that's of importance. One being the URL, so you know where to go. And I mean, later, if you want to add a custom domain to this, you can definitely do so. And also here you have a workflow file, so you can see all the different build instructions, and you can alter this one after the fact. Right, if we zoom in on that workflow file again, so we see what's going on. If you look at the top here, top right, we see that we have an if clause, so we see when it's being triggered on pull request, but also push towards the master, and you can definitely configure this. Looking at the top left here, we see that we have our full application. We have a source directory, but now we also have this .github subdirectory and a workflow subdirectory, and this YML file that's been added for us. Looking at the bottom right, we see that we have these three different selections that we made in the portal, which is the application. This is the source code. So let's say, for example, we have an app that would contain our front-end app in a subdirectory, our API in a subdirectory, and so on. We would need to be more specific than to just say the root of the application, as we're doing here. API location says API, and then we have the app artifact location, and we say build. And this is, because when you build a React application, you end up with this build directory. So this is telling Azure Static Apps where to actually find the built distribution. Now, I said before that static web apps are great. They're fast, and you can augment them with an API if you want. This is the time to do so. An API, when it's added to static web apps, is a function app. So if you are Azure users, that means that is the serverless solution that you're using on Azure. Let's see what that might look like. So here we are starting off with a backend. I have already scaffolded a function app project. I've selected create new project. I've selected it to be of type JavaScript there. And yeah, I've already done this like a good TV chef. And I've also created this endpoint product. And you can see that it's quite simple beast. All it does is to have a products list, and we are returning this list of products from it. So it's super simple. It's just a serverless API that we want to be able to talk to. And yeah, so the idea here is to first get this to work locally. And once we get it to work locally between front end and back end, then we kind of feel comfortable enough to be deploying this. A comment on this. So if you're working with function apps, make sure that you set up CORS locally, so it's possible to actually from a front end to talk to a backend, because normally this is blocked because it's different domains, right? Or it's rather localhost 3000, for example, for the front end, and function app API might be still on localhost because you're running it locally, but it might have a different port, in which case CORS is being triggered. So by setting CORS to star or HTTP localhost, of the front end, you can kind of circumvent this CORS check. So this is what you do. You add this host entry, you set CORS to star, which means it allows everything. And because this is a local setting, you don't need to worry about this ending up in production and opening up this API to the entire world. This is just something that happens locally. If we move on here, of course, we want to go back to our front-end application at some point, but let's first start up this application API. So it's up and running, and it's ready to receive requests. It spends a few seconds building, and once it's done building, you're going to see this endpoint, right? That's good. So now we're back inside of our React application, and one thing we need to do when we work with this locally is to add this entry for a proxy. So once we go towards /API, it knows where to go. So here we have HTTP localhost 7071, and this is where our function API is found at. So this is the second change we need to do. And of course, we need to look inside of our component, our products.js, and instead of having it rely on static data, we actually make that call towards a backend. So we're gonna uncomment here some code. So take away that static code and now enable our fetch call. And again here, if we go towards /API/products, this means that the proxy will work and it will instead remap this towards localhost 7071/products, which is hitting our function API. And yeah, we can remove those. That was just some crap. So once we did this, we can save this and we can make sure that our front-end application is up and running. npm start, and yeah, takes a few seconds. Here you can see if we go towards products, we see that it now loads the data from the function API instead of that static data. So now it returns book and movie, which comes from the function API. So we have verified that this works locally, and the great part here about static web apps is that the only thing you need to focus on at this point is to make sure that you push everything towards the cloud once again. So we're adding these API parts with all these changes, especially the one in products.js component, and now we see how that works for us. I think this one takes a couple of minutes as well. Yeah, it pulls all the Docker containers, and once it's done that, it's going to go through build and deploy. And you know how that works. It's going to do an npm install of all the different packages. Once it's done that, once it's built everything, and it's going to be done. So deployment complete is the last message here in green. You can see on row 206. Okay, then. Let's see, we can jump this a little bit. Yeah, okay. So now we have redeployed. We see that we have home. We see that we have product. So if we click it, we see that it's now, whoop, we had a bit of a cold start there on a second and a half, I think. So now we are actually getting the response from an API that we just added. And the only thing we did for this API was for it to exist in a subdirectory called API. So now we have a front end and we have an API backend that we're talking to. We're going to do one more thing. Oh, it broke. That's not good, right? Well, here's the thing I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation. This is where you need this fallback route, because this is how SPA frameworks work, because their routing, if you look at this routing, you see that it does /products. It has no clue what actually to do with this, because you need to, so what you need to do is to actually redirect it back to the starter file of your SPA app, and then it can read on this URL and try to interpret where to actually go inside of the SPA application. So we need this fallback route. So we need to go back into our code, and we need a file called routes.json. And this is a convention in static web apps. So we have our route.json, and we have added this routes property, and inside of that array, we have an entry. And yeah, so we're saying for all route star, which is every type of request, we make sure that it goes through index.html first. So our SPA application is being activated and kind of redirects people or users where they should be. So we have that in place. That's great. We have a route. We can serve it up. We have a status code. Great. One thing we need to make sure, though, is that this routes.json is actually being copied. Now, there are different ways of doing this. I believe you can be using a module called NPC if you want to do this more elegant. I'm just making this work. What I'm doing essentially is to copy the routes.json into the build directory, the directory that's being created once I build my React application. So I just add this to the build command. So not only does it do build, but it also does this copy of this routes.json file. And I run the build locally just to make sure that this actually works. and I have a routes JSON under the build directory. That's good, that's promising. At this point, we are ready to deploy things again. But yeah, we need to add this routes JSON and this little change we did in package JSON, and we need to commit everything and push it to our repo, so it's being picked up by the Static Web Apps GitHub Actions. So we push it. That's great news. And we're gonna have a little look here and see what goes on. And it's trying to build and it's trying to deploy everything again. And this time around, I bet you the routing is gonna work once I hit the refresh button. See if we can speed this up a bit. It's like watching paint dry a little bit to have a look at these logs, if I'm honest. So we see that it's pulling all the different containers from Docker, and it does its usual business. I think it has probably cached up npm install at this point. But if you look at the timer here, it's a few minutes back and forth, building and deploying. And yeah. And now it's running this npm install for production. That's good. Yeah, and polling on deployment, finished upload. That means we are at the final steps. Okay, then now we have redeployed this. So the first thing we can do is actually hit refresh. Lo and behold, this works now, right? Because the fallback route is in place. It understands what /products means, and our app is whole again, if you wish. So that concludes this second demo. Let's talk about something else for static web apps that's an important part, authentication and authorization. As I said earlier, we support different providers. Active Directory is definitely supported. We're also supporting different social logins such as GitHub, Twitter, Facebook, and so on. The steps you need to take as the application or the developer of the application is to send an invite to your users. That's how it works. And it works in 3 different steps. First, you have a generate step. What you want to do is to say, hey, I'm going to be using this provider. This is the username or email address of the user I intend to invite. And then I need to be selecting a domain. If you have set up a custom domain at that point, that's what you will be entering. If you don't have a custom domain, it will pre-fill it with the one that is generating for you. You also need to specify what roles you think this user should be having. Are they a normal user? Are they an admin? What kind of user are they? So it's a comma-separated thing. And then you say, how long is this valid for? So you enter this number, so you say valid for X hours. And after that, you generate a link. And once you have that link, it's as a developer, you should be inviting this user. So you send this generated link through email or through Slack or whatever kind of means that you have. And once the user receives this link and click it, they will actually be prompted from that auth provider to log in. And once they do so, they are inside of your app and is able to use it in the way that you specify. Okay, that's a lot of theory, a lot of bullet points, but imagine it looks like this, right? I mean, you go into the portal, you go inside of your deployed application, you go into role management, and you hit invite here at the top. Once you do so, you select the provider, the email address, the domain, the role, and the expiration. Once you've done all that, you have a generated link that you're able to send to your users of your app. And yeah, how do I actually implement this? I mean, this is just the invite phase, right? How do I actually make this work inside of my application? Well, imagine first that you have a login link. You can, here at the top, you can see how we have this .auth route. And then we .auth/login/provider. I've just entered GitHub here, but if it was Twitter, you'd be entering Twitter here and so on. So you would need to replace this depending on what provider that you go with. And then inside of routes JSON, you need to add a few entries. One entry you need to add is this one where we specify /login inside of our application should be served now with this built-in route. And this is to make sure that you tell the application and you tell the system, this is the provider that I'm going with. And you didn't need a logout link somewhere in your application, but you need to make sure you pointed towards .auth/logout. One important thing that I usually set here at the bottom is something called post-login redirect URI. And if you make that part of the login process, you make sure to point them to somewhere in your application that you think the user should end up after they logged in. So by specifying this to, I don't know, /dashboard, you make sure that once the user logs into GitHub, for example, they end up on that dashboard after login. So this is a good property to amend to your login link. Right. So now that the user is logged in, let's pretend that's the case. Your user has been logged in and you want to know something about the user. If you are on the front end part of the application, you can easily use a fetch and just go towards .auth/me. At that point, it will reply with this JSON here that you see on the right, and it will be able to tell you things such as identity provider, user roles, and so on. So if you want to code-wise, for example, redirect them towards a certain place in the app based on what user roles they have. It's a very similar process if you're in the function app API and want to do the same thing. So here you have request headers, and you just need to encode it in a way so that you're able to read it, and then you turn it into ASCII and you're able to see just the same kind of JSON as you saw on the front end. Right. You can also configure your application. So now we're inside of routes.json, and you just add an entry like this here on the left where you can say, for example, /profile should be protected, and the only way for you to actually reach /profile is if you're authenticated. That means that you're logged in using one of these providers. On the right is a more realistic look of what your app might actually look like. So here we see our first entry. /profile is authenticated. Admin, you need to be an admin to be there, so you need to have that as part of your roles array. And if you go to customer Contoso, then you not only need to be an admin, but you need to also exist in the customer Contoso role. So you can see here that we're also adding the /login to say GitHub. But if this try to go towards Twitter, we say 404 because that's not a provider that we support. And then we have logout, and then we have this, made up calendar component. And if they hit that one, they will go towards calendar HTML. So you can see you can make this very configuration heavy and easy, and easily protect different routes in your application. We have come to the end of our presentation. So again, we talked about two different types of apps. The Azure Static Web Apps support both of them. So yeah, you have the static apps that you might not have seen before. It's a good idea to have a look at static apps, to have a look at the Jamstack. You can definitely save time by building part of your app as a static app and using Gatsby or ViewPress or something like that, and make part of your app super fast. Imagine that you're in e-commerce. That's a great example for making part of your app static. Web apps, that's the apps that you're probably used to. They have a backend. They resolve just in time, which might take a while, right? Unless you really optimize. A static web apps, that's the service I've been demoing today that should make deployment super easy for you. And it can deploy two parts, right? One being the front end that you saw that we built in React in this case, but it could easily have been Gatsby. And two, if you have a subdirectory called API, and you can create a function app in there, and suddenly you have an API that can run with your app. And lastly, we talked about authentication and authorization, and how you could be using different providers to easily not only support login and logout, but also protect different parts of your app, either behind a you should be authenticated role, but also maybe you need some kind of admin role. Some of you listening today, you might be .NET developers. There are good news for you. This is not just about JavaScript. Here's an article by Tim Hoyer, who works at Microsoft, and he's written an instruction how you make this work for Blazor as well, if you've seen the latest web framework here from Microsoft. So definitely .NET is on the rise. And yeah, because this is a preview, there's not a full 100% support yet of .NET, but it definitely works. With that said, they are definitely working hard in the engineering team to make sure that this is supported as well as JavaScript. If you want to learn in your own time how to do different deployment scenarios, you have one Learn module that I authored about Gatsby and using the static web apps. And then you have a Learn module by John Papa, where he goes through deploying and setting up fallback routes and more using Angular, React, Vue, and Svelte. So it's a Learn module that has 4 different paths that you can choose from. If you want to know more about how to secure your application, this is the link that I recommend that you go to. Right, Rasmus and Sherry, do you have any questions for me? Or maybe we have some questions from our listeners.
Yeah, there is some questions from the listeners. Some of them was already answered by Ivan, but maybe it would be good just to bring them into here as well, so we have them in the recording. So there is a question from Jose, where he's asking, in static web apps, can we make a contact form without the backend?
If you only make the static part, no. But if you add the function app API, like I just showed you, you can definitely have that, work, right? Because it's kind of hard to do a contact form, and because you need to be saving that, and you need to use some kind of email service. It is entirely possible, depending on what email provider that you're using, that you could be talking to an API from the front end, and that way kind of not have a backend at all. So if you're reliant completely on third-party external APIs, definitely you can actually solve it all the way there. But you might have some pre-work that you need to do prior to sending it to that email provider. So for that reason, you might want to rely on a function app as a backend.
Okay, great. We have one more from Jose, actually, and he's asking, are there limits for free deploying over the GitHub that you showed?
So this is free tier currently. I believe there are some limitations because this is a preview service, but also free tier. I'm not exactly sure when it triggers. I remember having triggered it myself, but that was a lot of deployed apps because that's what we do internally, right? Try to use our services. I think it's something around a few hundred deployed apps. It's something around there. So you have quite a lot of room to experiment. But I think Microsoft will be more clear on this point where the limit goes as it goes from preview to production service. But for now, we definitely want your feedback and see, can I use this for hobby projects? Does it work well? Does it cover my scenarios? Are there any scenarios you run into? Definitely contact back to me and people like me on Microsoft, because we want to hear your feedback if there are scenarios that you think should be supported.
Okay, thanks. There's one more question from the chat here, and it's from Andre, and he's asking, can you deploy Razer pages to Azure Static Web Service?
Well, here's the thing, right? Because you're kind of using Razer pages is the traditional ASP.NET thing, right? And that's not fully supported yet. But in Blazor, you're kind of using the whole Razer templating when you're doing Blazor apps. So in that sense, it's supported, but we don't officially support, pure ASP.NET yet. But you can definitely, if you use Blazor and C#, you have a way. But if your question is, can I just straight up take my ASP.NET app and deploy it? The answer is no for now. But I know we're talking a lot to the internal groups to make sure that this is a great experience for a lot of people.
Okay, thanks. So, Sherry, did you also have some questions?
Yes, can I also ask my question? So one of my questions for you, Chris, is that when do you recommend to use the static web apps, and then when do you recommend us to use the normal web apps that we have in this scenario?
I see 2 different scenarios in front of me. I usually go back to e-commerce because the reason for that is that they're a good option and a good mix environment where it makes sense to have certain pages render super fast and other pages be more dynamic. For example, when you have a cart, right? If you have a cart, it's dynamic. You don't know what it's going to be in there. Most likely, though, product pages. They may change once a month. For that reason, it makes sense to make those pre-rendered. So what I want to say is really try to identify part of your existing web app and see if you can make that static, then it makes sense to be deployed using this service. So see if you can kind of cut up your application a little bit. Smaller applications make sense that kind of are more, I have a SPA application or like Angular React Vue, I just rely on APIs or I might rely on CDNs. It makes a lot of sense for you to be interested in this for that reason.
And then if there is a scenario that I have actually both of them, I mean, it can cover by both of them. Would you recommend to go for static web apps over the normal kind of the traditional web apps?
I mean, today we kind of rely on the fact that we build front ends and back ends separately, which means our back end can be anywhere, right? I mean, it could be on Amazon or Azure or Netlify. We don't really care at this point. What we want is an app that serves what it should. So we tend to treat front ends as something we can put in a CDN somewhere, regardless if that's blob storage or static web apps. And we tend to think of our backend more and more as APIs, endpoints that we reach, either in the same domain or cross domain. So I would say today it's easier to move into a scenario where you can use Azure Static Web Apps. So, I mean, if you start out small and all you know is that, hey, I got a SPA application or I got a static site generator and I can only rely on serverless, it makes a lot of sense for you to have a look at the service. If you want to build it out gradually with different APIs, those APIs could be on app service, easily. I mean, you can still have your front-end application being replicated across a lot of CDN computers, right? And have that API be inside of an app service. So I would say if you start out small, definitely if you're a startup or you have your hobby project or it's a very limited app in terms of what it can do, it makes a lot of sense to look at this, especially if you are using Angular, React, or something like that, and you know that you're starting out small, you don't have a ton of APIs.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. And there is one question also from Twitch, is talking about the, can you tell us a bit more about the roadmap for static web apps?
I think some of this is kind of internal information, so I have to make sure I mention things I can mention. But I know that they're talking a lot about stability. They're talking a lot about supporting different tech stacks. As I said, I got this question earlier about Razer pages. I know that .NET is something we are discussing a lot and making this work for everybody. I mean, function app today, for example, I mean, you can have all sorts of languages when you build function apps, and it definitely supports that. So, I mean, already, if you think about the fact that you can build APIs in Python, PowerShell, Java, C#, JavaScript, and so on, you have a lot of languages there already. But to try to answer generally about the product roadmap, I would say make sure that we can remove that preview, flag that we have currently on the service, and make sure that we have different tiers as well, because people will have demands on when it comes to throughput and scalability and those kind of things. I have to go back to the engineering team and ask them exactly what the time is for that. I mean, how many months we are talking, but it's a good idea to have a look out from people like Burke Holland, John Pop, and myself for these kind of product news. There's also some names that I can give it to you if you want to tweet about them later, who are product PMs, and they could probably answer even better than I can.
Yes, that's true. You can actually maybe give them to pass them to Rasmus and I, and we can include it in the follow-up email that we are sending to everyone.
There is one more question from the chat I can see. So Jose is asking, which kind of changes do I need to do in our DNS server to use static web apps? Is it just the CNAME?
I think that's a good question, because if I remember this correctly, we handle Apex domains and other kinds of domains differently. So it would be difference between www.something domains versus that doesn't have that prefix. For the ones it's www, it's a CNAME. I believe we have some way of making Apex domains work through a name. I believe there are some blog posts. I think I can find that if you can send that to a follow-up. This is not my expertise. I should mention that, but I remember there were two different solutions depending on what kind of domains you had.
Okay, let's include that in the follow-up as well. Thanks for the question, Jose.
Yeah. Also, I can see that Jose is actually referring to the video of John Papa during build. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good good demo. And then one of the link that that Chris mentioned it in his presentation also refers to almost the same topic, but on the Learn course.
Yeah, so myself, John Pop, and a lot of other individuals have been authoring a lot of these docs that I'm linking to. So definitely what John talked about is included in his Learn module, but also in the docs that's on the last page of the slide.
So, is there any more questions in the audience? Did we cover all the questions, Cosmos?
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any more questions from the audience. So awesome talk, Chris. Thanks a lot for that. I also see here that there's good feedback from question in the chat that they think it's a good presentation that you did, and I completely agree. So thank you a lot for that. And but if they want to continue the conversation with you and of course ourselves, then how can we find you, Chris?
The easiest thing is on Twitter, Chris_Noring. That would probably be the easiest one. My IMs are open, so definitely slide into my IMs. I will do my best to answer and see if I either can answer myself or route it to the engineering team behind this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. And to you, Jose, we are gonna tell you how to claim the badge in a moment. Very important stuff. So firstly, we need your feedback. So this is the dev show, not only for us. It's mostly your show, exactly. So we need your feedback to improve the future episodes to suit the wishes that you have, both in terms of the content of what you want to hear, but also which experts do you want us to bring in. So if you scan this QR code, there is an evaluation form that so please fill it out. And also, if you want to be our next speaker, we want to hear about it. So please go in and fill out the feedback. There will also be a link in the follow-up email that you will get. So enough of that. I can see that Jose and others, they want to talk about some more fun stuff. So Sherry, can you share about what you promised us in the beginning, how to claim this badge? I want to have it as well. You promised me it for 2 months and I didn't get it yet. So I'm gonna scan this code.
Yeah, now you have a chance. So but just click by scanning this QR code. You can get your badge, and then this QR code is valid till for the next 24 hours. We are going to include it in the follow-up email if you miss it for now. If you never used Azure Heroes badges before, it asks you to download an app which is called Engine. The reason behind it is that this QR code is a pretty unique one, and then Azure Heroes is based on the blockchain, is Ethereum blockchain. So you need to store it safely in your digital wallet. And one thing to remember, I learned it in a hard way. Once you are using the digital wallet, you need to have a password. And then if you lose that password, you're losing all of your badges. I learned it in a hard way, but so remember that. And so this is one of the badges that we have. And this Summer Learner is the special edition during the summer. So after summer is over, even though it's over in Denmark, but we pretend it is still summer here, you cannot have this badge before anymore.
So this is all cool. What can I use these badges for? Just explain it for me, right?
Yes, that is a very good question, Cosmos. So once we are actually over and we are getting back to good old days, that you can meet us at the different conferences, at the different events, you are going to be able to actually exchange them with some cool swags that we have.
Wow.
I assume, Rasmus, you actually wearing one of them right now. I forgot to wear it.
So
Yes, look
like
at
a t-shirt
it.
like this, right?
Yes. So,
Wow.
we have a lot of plans for them. This is we recently started this, and I want you all to, if you want to hear more about the Azure Heroes, because Summer Learner is one of the badges that we have. We have multiple different badges, and some the learner badges are the one that you can collect them as many times as you can and exchange them with some cool swags later on, or some invitation to some events. But also we have some badges that they are quite more valuable, and you can have one of them per year, such as inclusive leader. If you are trying to make our events or your community more inclusive, you can claim that badge. There is a form on aka.ms/azure.heroes. You can nominate yourself or your community friends in order to get these badges. And of course, you can check what people are talking about it if you check out the Azure Heroes hashtag. So once more again, this is the QR code, and we are going to send it to you soon. So what's next, Cosmos?
Yeah, I just before we go next, I can see that someone in the chat is saying that the feedback form is not working. We will of course fix that. So the link is working right after the show. And as Sherry, you shared in the beginning, this is a dev show. It's gonna come on up weekly. So already Tuesday next week at the same time, we will have one of my really good colleagues in Microsoft as well here in Denmark, Abhishek. He's a cloud solution architect working as an app dev architect in one of the biggest account in Denmark. And he's going to talk about how to use Azure monitoring and logging. So join in again in 1 week from now to watch Abhishek in this talk. But that's not all, right, Sherry? Do you have all other recommendations in terms of what the audience can go and see outside of the dev show?
Yes. I included some events that I saw in the community. One is that next week on August 12th, we are going to have, if you're front-end developers and interested in Angular, we have one of the Angular team members, Minko, is going to talk about the state of Angular. And we have a lot of community news during that event. And we have Kenneth Christiansen, who is one of our Danish local superheroes that he's going to talk about everything about the USB. So it's actually a pretty good topic, and I personally am looking forward to watch that one. And then we are going to have and Dev Show as well. We are going to have Irina and Magnus talking about the secure development on 18th, and again on 18th. Azure User Group Denmark is also having an event about the Azure with the resource graph. One of the MVPs, Alexander, is going to talk about it on 25th. We are going to have on Dev Show Infrastructure as a Code with Simona. And again, on August 25, Azure User Group is having a session about cloud migration stories with another MVP, Rick. So I just noticed this. We have both us and Azure User Group. We have the same day. We chose the same day, but definitely we are not at the same time. And we are going to find out that how we resolve our conflict later on.
So now everybody knows what they're doing on Tuesdays, right?
Yes, apparently Tuesday was a good day. I know that normally between NG Copenhagen and Copenhagen JS, we normally, both of us, we are choosing Thursdays. to do
Okay.
that. So yes, Azure is on Tuesday and JavaScript is on Thursday, apparently, in Denmark. But yes.
Yeah, and of course we will fix the feedback form. But if you have feedback outside of the feedback form, please contact us directly on our Twitter handle. You can also find us on LinkedIn and other places. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and also go and follow the 4devs and MSDev DK Twitter handles.
Yes, so best way for to contact us is on Twitter, but of course you can follow us on you can contact us on LinkedIn and everywhere, and I'm going to make sure that why the feedback form doesn't work, and I will let you update it. So should we say see you all next week at the same time, because our plan is that to have this show going on weekly at the same time.
Definitely. Thanks all from the audience, and thanks Chris and Sherry. Awesome show. Have a good Tuesday evening. Bye bye.
Ciao. Bye bye.